Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Jeremy. I have the pleasure to welcome Giovanni Lauricella, Managing Partner of Lifeblood Medical. Uh, Giovanni, nice to meet you and welcome here in this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to because you have a pretty extensive experience on the medical device industry. I want to learn more about like your activity. I want to learn more about like your experience. There's a lot of different topics that I want to discuss with you on the staffing key individual for MedTech company. How is that different from other companies? I want to discuss all of that. So let's start with just very quickly a little bit more about like your background. How did you ended up in that industry?
So, long, wild story, but shortly after graduating from university, I had a couple quick stints internationally down in Central and South America that ultimately brought me back to South Florida. And I joined a firm that was a recruitment firm that had somewhat of a focus in med tech and medical device. And that was really my first foray into the industry. Very,
Hmm.
very early on, very quickly, I should say, absolutely fell in love with the complexities, the technology, the regulated aspect of it, the fact that you could build a device and not just go right to market or eBay or Amazon and sell it to people, but you had to go through this third party called notified bodies or the FDA, for example. And it was a coin toss sometimes. Sometimes it was approved, sometimes it wasn't. Then you had to do all these either quick fixes or sometimes not so quick fixes. They were all very expensive. And other times, once you were approved, then the next chapter started of actually how do you get this technology into the patient's or physician's hands, and that's really where the game of commercialization starts. So it was it was a never-ending story or pool of information to learn, and it was fascinating. So when you can't ever really catch up with anything and there's always something to learn, I usually get enthralled with that type of environment. And so that was medical device. Very quickly after that, I decided that I wanted to continue going to school. I went and got my master's in regulatory affairs in medical devices and biopharma with
Wow.
a special focus in medical devices out of Northeastern up in Boston, Northeastern University. And that really solidified my foundation of understanding everything from R&D through commercialization, everything that a medical device company or a medical device as a technology has to endure, because everything comes back to regulatory affairs in some capacity. There's regulations for R&D and quality and clinical and manufacturing and commercialization and marketing, et cetera. So that was my foundation that locked me into the industry. And then after that, I looked behind me and I had numerous years of networking, voracious networking, friends built all over the world that were doing way cooler things that I could ever imagine doing myself. And that never ending chasing of passion for this industry just continues.
Yeah, it's passionate that I'm curious. Like when you were working with that company originally, did you? I mean, I would say like most of your customers or the company, the medical device company that you were working with, were which phase they were in? Is that like were they like more like startups, like starting on the journey of the medical device, or were they like post regulatory approval, starting to the commercialization, or did you see like everything?
So the answer, generally speaking, is I saw everything. Where the larger part of the bell curve fell was typically right around prototype stage of R&D, so not white sheet of paper first day on the job or on the concept phase. It was really more of a
Hmm.
prototype phase of R&D where they started to obviously need external money, but also more bandwidth of people to take that to the next phase. So we'll call it concept stage of R&D, and then going through design freeze, and then going through clinical trials, and then we went all the way through commercialization for sure. Usually, the companies that were post pilot commercialization, when you already started having 5+ million in annual revenue, you become a different
Hmm.
company. There's processes involved,
Mm.
there's HR involved. There's a different feel to the process and structure of a company at that stage versus the free spirited, almost faking it till you make it type approach of building a company along the way. Um, so to answer your very specific question, the most of what I worked with, and that was a choice, was
Mm.
the pre-approved companies in that R&D, clinical quality, regulatory, manufacturing phases.
Okay. Were you specializing in some type of profile for? I mean, because like I mean, we discussed like you are providing and I mean finding perfect profile. I mean, engineers or any type of hire for those medical device company. That was like your activity. Did you guys specialize in a specific type of engineering profile, or were you able to find any type of new hire?
So when we talk about the previous firm, I ran my own practice there. So it was almost like my own little mini business. I had my own team, I had my own clients, and I was basically running on my own thesis. The previous firm that I
Mm.
was with, they work with the big conglomerates, they work with the multinationals, and then they also work with the startups and everything in between. And sometimes once in a while, they'd even go outside of MedTech and do, construction and that kind of stuff. So I was always very heads down, very focused, medical device or bust. We call it MedTech. It could be the catheter, it could be the implant of the neuromodulation device, or it could be the surgical robot, or it could be the remote patient monitoring device that also had a hardware as well as software component, and then started getting into more software as a medical device. We'll call it later on as it started populating or popping up more and more. But with regards to your question on what kind of profiles we were finding, on my practice and with my team, it was everything. So if a company or whoever's listening on this who is building teams for their own companies, if you've ever worked with a recruiter and a recruitment firm before, just on the extremes, there's typically two types of recruitment firms on the extreme polar opposite end. So there's one that are contingency recruiters. So you put an agreement in place and they run around really quickly and find resumes, and hopefully if you hire one of those resumes they get a fee. There's not really a clean structure or process or um, craft or profession, if you will, on that one. You're competing against your client, because if they get someone who applied through their own website portal, then they don't need the contingency recruiter anymore. It just is a very different, less structured partnership. And then on the antithesis of that is you have these usually bigger houses and bigger, well-established firms that are called retained search, and they
Mm.
do a lot more executive recruitment, typically only dealing with VPs or even C-level or board of directors. And then you have some of these houses that specialize, like they only do clinical affairs or they only do regulatory and quality. But I never really understood that. And I also get fascinated because my background is in regulatory affairs, right? Like I mentioned when I got my
Mm.
degree. So regulatory affairs
Mm.
touches all facets of a company, R&D through commercialization. And, I'll just give you an example of how my brain worked on building my practice was, if you're doing a CEO search, which we would get hired by regularly, a venture capital firm or a board would hire us to put in a CEO for one of their portfolio companies or a board that they're sitting on. Um, and, it takes a while to put in a CEO. Uh, After you
Mm.
find the candidate pool, you're working with, let's call it a handful or two handfuls of candidates that are likely one of them is going to get hired for the position over 3 or 4 months of going through these interview processes, et cetera. And you're building relationships with all of them. And then that CEO who ultimately gets hired takes over the company and then has his or her first board meeting, and they come out of the board meeting typically with 3 to 4 crucial hires that they have to implement their strategy over the next year or something like that. And
Mm.
it's human nature, right? I mean, especially if they haven't worked with 10,000 recruitment firms before, they're like, okay, I have to hire these 3, 4 positions. One's a R&D engineer, one's a software manager, one's a VP of manufacturing, and I have to hire a clinical director to run my clinical trial. And well, their natural human behavior would be to turn around to the recruiter who just put them into the position and to taking over that company. And if that person's like, nope, sorry, we only do CEO positions, well, then you just put the burden on that new CEO to go find and have to weed through which recruiters that they have to work with. Do they like them? Do they like their style? And then how many do they have to work with? So I never understood that whole process. I like building companies from end to end. Sometimes, I get hired by the board to do a CEO search, and then that CEO will turn around and hire us for more positions from R&D through commercialization. Does it always work like that? Absolutely not. But
Mm,
that's a capability that we do have. I can do the executive positions. We do a lot of them, but also
mm,
I calls from R&D directors that have to hire three, one plastic engineer, one hardware engineer, and one electrical engineer for a radio frequency catheter ablation technology that they're building an hour north of Denver. We do that too.
mm.
And so to answer the longest story that I could have told you on that short, simple answer is we build end-to-end teams, and we're capable of building the executive leadership, which is obviously always fun, great, very professionally rewarding, but then also being able to follow through with those relationships and help build out those remaining teams of getting all that minutia work done and moving the company forward as a whole. So our relationships span from entry level to executive level and board level, and also um, from R&D through commercialization, covering that whole gamut. So that's what we do.
Thank you. It's great insight. Can you let us know a little bit more about like the service that you provide? I mean, like we'll discuss about like the market. We'll discuss about. I have many questions for you, but just like first, let's try when your customer hire you, you're first finding the ideal candidates. Do you do like interviews? How do you basically serve your customer following that?
Great question. So focused on the startups or the lack of resourced companies that we typically work with. If you're working with teams that are as small as 5 people and upwards
Mm,
of 35, maybe 50, most of the companies that we typically work with are in that 15 to 30 person range, typically. And you
mm,
think about it, when you start talking about teams that small building a medical device, everyone has a purpose, right? And recruiting is not easy. Yes, it's my profession, but you have to keep in mind, I wake up every single day with the team and have nothing else better to do than interview, find people, design teams, give feedback, provide feedback, take in feedback, and learn what the market's telling us all the time. Like it's just one big algorithm of human behaviors in an industry. That's basically the essence of my job. Um, but when you then take that script of like, that's what I do all day, every day, and you go back into the medical device company that is building itself, well, 10 people, they have their own things that they have to do. They have manufacturing to worry about. They have clinical trials. Are the sites getting back to them? Is patient enrollment actually happening? As the CEO, you have all this stuff to do. You're raising money 80% of the time. You're having to prepare for board meetings. So the point is, um, I never also understood some of these companies that take a little bit of shortcuts here and there, who go throughout LinkedIn profiles, or I should say LinkedIn postings, and they all are so overwhelmed in building their technology company as is, but yet then they get 400 applicants through a LinkedIn process and they have to sort which ones work out. Or the other side of that is they don't do anything except look in their immediate network and they have 5 people that might be and they all work, but some of them are gray, like, oh, I like him, I trust him, that might happen, but I think he can do it. And then it's not necessarily the best talent either, right? So there's always this balance that
mm,
you have to look at. What we do is we alleviate that white noise, high volume effort of, okay, you're a 10-person startup company right now. You need number 11 that's going to be crucial to whatever process or phase that you're in at. What we will do is we will source the candidates. We will make a very clear and detailed presentation. We'll present their resume. We do something called a candidate memo, where we spend hours with that candidate learning about, are they right for the role and technology that our client is, that we're recruiting for, so that by the time that we make this candidate presentation, it's not really like oh, what do you think? Do you like this person or not? It's like, no, we know what you're looking for. We did a kickoff call together. We have all the information that we need, at least up front. We're recommending you interview this person. And then we go through that and we do all the logistics behind that. We make it all easy. So, they're not dealing with, oh, is this person available between 3 and 5 on Thursday? No, we'll do that for you. We'll put it on your calendar so that you could show up to an interview. Then we're going to debrief. Then we're going to do that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until we start debriefing with the client and they say, these are our top two choices. After doing all the interviews, we'd like to run with these people. Either we can conduct the references, meaning my firm, and we do that in writing, because sometimes companies think about references as a checkbox, like what candidate's going to give references for themselves that's going to talk shit about them. Like, obviously, everyone's going to talk positively. So sometimes they're like, what am I really going to learn in a reference? Other times they're like, I don't want you guys doing the references, meaning us. I would rather hear the references of this person that I'm about to hire just in case someone asks some questions, etc. Fine, we'll do that. Or you can do that. Go for it. But we'll get the references for you. And then when it comes down to the negotiation process and the offer process, in 2017, California and Massachusetts passed a law that you can't actually ask somebody what they're making. Whoa, that's weird to me. Maybe I just upset a lot of people who are listening to this right now, but candidates benefited, right? Like, let's just say you're an early engineer in California and you're making $110,000 with a 10% bonus. And all of a sudden you find yourself in an interview process and you're nailing it. Everyone's loving you. And you get to the end of the process and they want to make you an offer. And they're like, yeah, well, we'd like to make you an offer. What sounds appealing? And that candidate turns back to them and says, well, since you can't ask me what I'm making, what I'd love to know is, what do you think my value is? What is my value to joining your company? And then you're like, what the hell is that? Okay, well, now I have nothing to go off of. So there's no science or facts to deal with here. And I really like this person. And for some reason, I don't know, I'm making it up. I think you're worth 140 and 20%. That's on the high end extreme. Maybe the other one is like, I really like you and I have no idea what I'm doing as a hiring manager. And since I don't have anything to go off of, I'd love to give you $90,000. Meanwhile, you have no idea that the person's making 110 and 10%. So you're either going to heavily overpay or you're going to make an offensive offer that's under. And you're going to end up losing the candidate or definitely getting the candidate, but then overpaying. So to make that long story short, that's always not the case. But that is definitely what has happened over the years when you can't ask, and also just in general, having a third party like us, or for that matter, any recruitment firm, everything's wonderful and roses when people are interviewing for a company. They're like, oh my God, I love that job. I would love to be there. How cool is that technology? I know I can nail it. And they're like, oh my God, that candidate's amazing. I would love to have that person on my team. Then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I'd like to make you an offer. Boom. Okay, well, how much can I get out of you? I'm the candidate. I want the best offer out of you. I'm going to milk you for everything you have. And then the company's like, damn, I want that person. I'm going to get him for the cheapest I possibly can. I'm going to hold back as much money as I can. I want to see how cheap I can get him. Well, when you're a third person, a third party like me, you can kind of balance that both thing. Like, you can understand what your client's budget really is and not abuse it by any stretch. But then you can also find the pain points of that candidate and say, okay, listen, like, I'm going to get you a healthy offer. But if your expectations are completely out of whack with the reality of the world, this is likely not going to work out. But that's up to you and I to have that conversation on how crazy you're about to be. So what really makes sense? And so having that touch point and that subtlety enables us to craft an offer that I can finally go back to my client after I've really built that relationship with the candidate and said, listen, here are the real world circumstances. They have 2 kids in high school, blah, 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 all this stuff. This is what they're making now. Realistically, a respectful offer is X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. Anything less than that? Go ahead.
Can you, as a third party, ask the candidates how much they're making? No.
Yeah. Tell me why I can't, of course.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah, that's the advantage to use a third party then.
The worst case scenario is what? The candidate's going to be like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, well, I'm retained on this position. If I can't get you an offer that makes any sense, we don't have any real business talking anymore. Like, I like you, but if you're not going to work with me, I'm trying to make this happen for you. If you're not going to work with me, then how far is this relationship really going to go? And by the way, you're showing your true colors right now, because I'm here to get you a good offer. I'm not going to get you $1 million, right? This is the respectful real world, right? I mean, if you're a clinical director at a company and you're making 175 or 200 right now, I'm not going to get you 400. I'm going to get you a healthy offer that hopefully will make it worth your while, especially if you like the technology. But if you're already being challenging right now, what does that really mean and tell about yourself right now as a human being? And am I dodging a bullet by putting you in my company or my client's company if already you're just not being a very open, collaborative person? And I've
Mm.
after thousands of hires, I mean, that's literally been my experience. The ones that have been really, really challenging throughout the process, if for some reason they end up on the team, end up being very, very challenging employees unnecessarily. The ones that have this very real world, holistic approach and kind of
Mm.
guide the process like cutting warm butter, right? Like making it easy,
Mm.
usually are excellent teammates, excellent communicators, go with the flow or have something to say but are open minded to others, and they make excellent employees.
Yeah, that's so true what you're saying. I have a question. So when we see like a medical device startup, and you see the different phase, can you touch on at what point do you think like a startup need to engage with a recruitment firm, and what's their need depending on the phase they are in?
Yeah. So recruiters exist because it's a fee for service. I will tell you, I get, I don't know, 10 solicitations a week of, hey, I think we're going to hire a CEO or we're going to hire a COO or we need someone to lead R&D. And then you ask them, so where are you? Well, we just started last year and we raised 125,000 to date. We're raising a 500,000 seed round. And I'm like, okay, hold on, hold on. So one of two things, or maybe three things, I don't even know how many options we're going to talk through real quick, but it's if I could even find somebody for you to have on your team, you likely couldn't even afford a standard market rate. So I'm not going to go out and find a stranger who works already at Medtronic or another startup company that has health insurance and their employee tax gets paid by the company, et cetera, to leave that and then come join you. When if they pay you a salary, that just takes them down to like 3 months of runway left before the company shuts down. So even if I
Mm.
can do that, well, then do I get a fee at all or do I just work for free? So the point is typically speaking, those very early stage seed stage companies, I'm very happy to give counsel. I'm very happy to give advice. I do it all the time for free. I even hate using that word for free. It sounds like a sales word, but it's true. I spend a lot of time with early stage startups building relationships. They always grow up. Well, they either fail or they always grow up. And if they grow up, then we have a relationship. And maybe when the timing's right and the cash is there, we can do something together. And counsel usually helps them too. But in terms of how early we can go, early enough when they can afford having a recruitment fee on top of taking on an employee's salary. That's typically about as early as we go. Then which can be early, by the way. I mean, it can be before Series A. It's typically at
Mm.
Series A. Series A,
Mm.
Series B, Series C, usually our sweet spot in terms of clientele that we work with more often than
Mm.
not. When you start getting into like 100-person company, 5+ million in annual revenue generation, and they have a board that they have to report to. That's a really established board because now we're already talking about, is there an IPO coming? Is there an M&A coming? Because we're already capped out at that point. They usually start implementing um, pretty heavy HR boundaries. And then HR has multiple flavors, right? They either want to work with recruitment firms um, because they're maxed out and they're doing benefits and they're doing company culture building, et cetera, or that's part of their job and they're also doing their own talent acquisition. And then it's self-preservation, the HR manager who's self-preserving, where it's like they look at recruiters as often competitors rather than
Mm.
augmentation or value adds to their own position. So that just really depends. So to answer your story is, typically we'll call it Series A when they're ready and able to pay for those recruitment fees on top of the full-time employee salary that they're looking to recruit and bring on their team, all the way through that whole time and purpose of HR kind of taking over from there.
Okay, and what's the type of? I mean, let's just a little bit back up. Like, if we are talking like about like a medical device startup, when they start and once they reach like seed, can you describe like before the Series A, what's the type of key employees that they usually have? And what's the type of profile that they tend to hire once they reach Series A, and the type of profile that you help them to hire at that point in time? I don't know if it's like all companies have the same type of needs and structure. No, I guess. But can you just share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely can share. I will tell you, it's definitely not a one size fits all approach. Every company
Mm,
is different. There are some stereotypes that we can see consistent patterns in. So I can speak to those, at least to attempt to answer your question. So around that seed stage, pre Series A, you're definitely dealing with the founding team. And that founding team can come in many flavors. More often than not, it's usually a technical founding team. You could have a physician in there. Uh, Maybe they were in the right place at the right time and had some sort of business acumen that they brought in early on, maybe an MBA that was ready to start a company together. So they usually have that founding team in there. Before Series A, if there's going to be, once again, stereotypically and generally speaking, if there's going to be add-ons before that Series A, we're typically talking about R&D. So you hear a lot
mm,
about um, a medical device startup company has, let's call it, between 2 to 4 founders, typically, usually 2 to 3. Um, and then they start adding on with the consultants. And there's a lot of consultant work that they do outsourcing in seed stage. But when they start
mm,
adding on full time, it's typically an R&D team. When Series A comes on board, you start being cognizant of what investors are looking for in terms of investing into a management team, and then what is really necessary to start executing as a company, because you have to start making that mental transition and phase of, we're not a technology startup anymore, we're a company. We're not a technology concept, we're a company. And there's a huge leap and gap in that thinking sometimes. And those early days of raising 100,000 or even 500,000, et cetera, where you're a concept and you're basically putting things together with electrical tape and glue and popsicle sticks, that very early on, taking that concept and then wrapping around a company around it, dealing with IP lawyers and the cost associated with those, outsourced product development firms, establishing company entities and all these costs associated with that. Like there's a lot of like business costs that start getting
mm.
associated early up front that most first time founders aren't aware of, when they get overly excited about like how they're going to revolutionize the world with the idea that they thought of for a concept of a medical device technology, and then turning that into a company is drastically different. So going back to Series A, when you start really becoming a company and the investors, you have to start appeasing investor mentality of like, okay, great, technology's cool, big market, great. Someone's hopefully going to buy this, which is the reason why we're talking. But if you can't turn that concept and technology into a properly run company, you're going to die off. And that's when, investing in talent means a lot.
Mm. So that means that typically in Series A, I mean, the strategies start to switch. I mean, it's never switching, but they start to have like a mindset which is more oriented toward growth, and then I mean, growth, commercialization are starting to plan that way, and therefore they may start to acquire some talent which are around that topic,
Yeah.
and strengthening up like as well like the technical side, right?
Correct. Series A, and then you start thinking about quality systems. So you might be hiring quality for the first time. If you're not just purely
Mm,
outsourcing it, maybe a quality engineer or a quality manager managing and overseeing the system or establishing the system. So quality starts coming into the picture. R&D starts being expanded upon. Depending on the technology in Series A, you might be thinking about hiring somebody to strategize on designing your clinical trial if you're there yet, depending
mm.
on how size, or I should say the size of Series A that you raised, but that's about right.
Okay. Can you just touch on very, very quickly on the benefit for an employee to join like medical device startups pre-Series A and post-Series A in terms of typically like what they can get on the equity, for example, like I don't know if you can have like some thoughts to share.
I do have a lot of thoughts on that. Um, I've heard I've heard the extremes of both the super positive and the super negative.
Mm,
So if the outcome is good, the earlier in you get, the more equity you get, obviously, because the more risk you're taking. And if the outcome is positive, where the company was run well, the company treated its employees well, where they got re-upped on equity when additional financing came in, where they didn't get overly diluted, you can make great financial returns as being an early stage employee of a company. Oftentimes it's not life changing. Like if you join as an R&D engineer to a founding team and you're employee number 5 in a startup company, and you get, I don't know, I'm really truly am making up the number, and you're in seed rounds and you get 2% of the company, and that
mm,
early on. It could even be less than that. I know when I start putting in R&D engineers, like what that true Series A, when there's expansion here, we're talking sub 1%, we're talking point whatever. So let's just say you get 2% and a seed level. I mean, by the time, if you're not topped off, you're heavily diluted. And, let's just say you're diluted down to 1%. Once again, I'm completely making it up. But if you own 1% of
mm,
the diluted company and the company sells for 2.5 or $250 million, well, you just made
mm,
2.5 million. I mean,
mm,
I'll take $2.5 million any day of the week, but I'm not retiring tomorrow at a youthful age where I still have decades ahead of me of work, right? I mean, 2.5 million
mm,
is great. It's not life changing. I mean,
mm,
sometimes we start talking about executives that, get the equity that's worth 10 million or 20 million or more than 20 million after the exit. That's life changing stuff. That's not the
mm,
typical medical device entrepreneurial story, just to be clear for everyone listening.
mm,
If you're in medical devices for the money, you're in the wrong industry. You could definitely make
mm.
money, you can make good money here, but there's other industries that you can make, what's the slang called, the FU money. And so the other question that you asked is like the negative side of that, where I've seen both sides is the benefit, or the downside of joining early on is like this hope and a prayer of having it be a positive outcome like I just described, but it's not. And then, you're
Mm,
taking typically a financial either backstep or sideways lateral, to join the company if you're an externally recruited employee. Um, you are then taking on heavy risk. You get, we'll call it sizable equity, but if the company's not managed well or has a negative ending, you could be taking a 5, 7, 10 year ride for something at the last year or last two to go completely sideways. And that
mm,
equity means nothing more than the wallpaper that you can put it on the wall with in your home. And,
mm,
then what? And that's typically when you start hearing people get burned out, or really jaded about startup companies because it wasn't the Netflix series where they joined a startup, they worked their ass off for 30 hours a day, and then they bought a yacht and they can buy a country by the time the country sold or the company sold. Like that's not
mm.
the typical medical device entrepreneurial story.
What's the, I don't know if you have any percentage on what's the pay cut that they have to accept in exchange of the equity compared to their previous salary? Like, is
That
that like a, yeah? There's
that
always
that's
like a minimum salary, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really it depends type question that you asked,
Mm,
because when you start talking about Series A or Series B or Series C companies, I mean, it's going to be depending every time I tell you about that. But a lot of what we do is, I mean, if there's candidates at Boston Scientific or Edwards Life Science or Medtronic, once you get past their long-term incentives with these crazy bonus plans that are multi-layered that they have, and you just get back and you get down to like the what they can take home right now, the base and bonus that Edwards or Boston Scientific pays. I mean, there's people that I take out of those companies and I put them into startup companies, and the money that they make at the startup company is more than what they were making at Medtronic. I mean, that's
Mm,
not abnormal. That's possible. There's also something in the middle where, at every stage of the company runs a very lean and mean ship. And so, sometimes they offer complete laterals, or, maybe it's a backstep a little bit on the base salary, but the bonus is higher, something like that. Like it
mm,
somewhat equates at the end of the day. But when then you start talking about the earlier you go, if you're coming from J&J as a principal R&D engineer who, after everything is said and done, you're making $250,000 a year, and you want to go join a seed stage company that maybe pays you $60,000 a year, but you get a bunch of equity because there's no money in the company, or to pay you $250,000 in that 1 year is the only money the company has. That's where you start seeing the back steps in pay for sure.
mm. What's the what recommendation feedback would you give to a founding team that when at seed stage, I mean, or pre-seed stage, when they don't have a lot of capital, they need to hire some people? What's the key feedback that you should give them to hire those key people to join the team with potentially like low budget at that point in time?
It depends if you're talking about the R&D expansionary work, or if you're talking about like more strategic roles that are typically expensive on salary, and there's just lack of, but where you have that chicken and the egg effect, where you need strategy, you need door openers, you need um, executive help in order to
Mm,
go out and raise the next round of capital, but you don't have that capital in order to get the executives that you need. That's a chicken and egg. So, is your question on the R&D side, or is your question?
I think it would be interesting to detail both use case on the R&D and as well executive, because I know that both advice are really interesting.
So on the R&D side, with regards to seed stage, pre-seed stage companies, when you're really just breaking out of the founder, the apps, like the first initial founders of a company, my best advice I could tell you is, hopefully those founders were somewhat experienced. Maybe they worked at a company or two before they started the company. I would reach out to your friends and colleagues from those previous companies and drag a friend over, someone that you trust. You're not going to really solicit a complete stranger. A complete stranger doesn't know you. A complete stranger that won't have the same passion as you, especially if they don't know you as that relationship building. Because if a friend you bring over, they're like, wow, we could do this together. Wouldn't that be fun? Like, I'm passionate about it too. If you get over a complete stranger, and they're just going to look at it as a job. And then if they look at it as a
Mm,
job, you can't afford them. So
mm,
it typically doesn't work. When you're
mm,
bringing on your first external one, two, I don't know, maybe even three hires from that founding team, a general piece of feedback that I would offer those listeners that are in that circumstance right now is, go through your Rolodex of people who you've worked with at previous companies that you know, that you trust, that you want to have a beer with. They may not on paper be the absolute perfect fit that you're looking for, but they cover enough. And then, since it's a startup where everyone wears multiple hats and they are in this gray area, and they're the jack of all trades, master of none type thing, I would just bring friends over as early as you can. That's how I would start on the
mm,
R&D side. With regards to the chicken and the egg challenge, that often occurs and exists very regularly with first time founding teams. They don't have the money to go out and hire the executives that they really need to show off to the investors to give them the money, and then they don't have the money to go out and get those executives. So that's that true catch 22 chicken and the egg thing. One piece of advice that I've given that has been very helpful to a lot of early stage founding companies is, bring on an independent board member. It costs you
Mm,
nothing except equity. You don't have any cash. Spend your equity. You do have that. Um, there was a, there is, and I'll quote her, Renee Ryan, wonderful, wonderful medical device executive, former investment banker, then corporate venture capitalist over at J&J, and then medical device operator. She famously said at one of the conferences that we were hosting, I've never met a company that died of dilution, but I have met plenty of companies that died from not having any money. And so
mm,
if you need to give away equity in order to bring on an independent board member who has had a wonderful, vibrant career of raising capital, building teams, has an amazing network that they can leverage to help you out. And you can bring them on as a board member where you give them, who knows, 1, 2, 3% equity to join your board as an independent. Um, and they're helping you open those doors. And they also can look nice on your slide deck because they are an advisor and a board member. And it doesn't cost you capital, meaning cash, but it does cost you equity. Then all of a sudden you just locked up amazing talent on the executive level to give you the behind the scenes, wonderful North Stars to follow, a wonderful piece of advice to execute on with the resources that you do have in hand, a Rolodex of investors that they can hopefully knock on doors, open them up for you, and like, oh, the investor, oh, God, Stephen, or oh, Mary, good to hear from you again. You're on that board,
mm,
really interesting. Obviously, you joined that board for a reason. I'd love to learn more about the technology, and that's how
mm.
good board members can open up doors for the companies that they sit on in terms of their boards. So, that's what I would advise. Either give away equity and bring on a really interesting business and board advisor or a board member in exchange for equity and help satiate that door opener and executive piece. That's that. And then on the R&D side, hire a friend.
That's great. Like, follow-up question, for the fundraising, do you think that an executive board member um, is the better choice compared to, for example, fundraising consultant or someone which we actually just do that specific task? I mean, the executive board member can give advice on the fundraising and give advice on the life and the operation of the company from A to Z. But maybe their participation into the fundraising process is just limited to the connection that they have with the experience that they have. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an overlapping question in some aspects, so I'll try to break it into two components. So one is the board member that you mentioned and helping out with raising capital, and the other one is hiring a firm to help you raise the capital. And if we're under the assumption that we're still talking about early stage companies, right?
Mm, yeah.
So let me tackle the outside independent firm first. Typically speaking, these firms have a monthly retainer, cash. So that's already a problem, early
Mm,
stages,
agree.
because then you got to spend that for an outside consultant. Even when you do hire this, there's no one in the world that can guarantee that they're going to actually raise the money for you. So then you're
Mm,
buying a hope and a prayer, and it's still costing you a monthly retainer. Then on top of that, you're also limited to their network as well. I'm sure it's somewhat
mm,
big, but you have to keep in mind the mentality of a consultant. Consultants live by cash. They're paid for fee for service, right? I mean, that's what all consultants are. I'm a consultant. I'm a recruiting talent acquisition consultant. If I don't make money, I can't sit in this chair in this office that I have rent that I have to pay for every single month. You know what I mean?
mm,
So
mm,
these guys and girls who are investment bankers or fundraising consultants, they have the same challenge that I do. If they don't have cash coming in every month or some big whale of a fee that comes in, they're out of business. So if all of a sudden they take on your project and they'll know pretty quickly, and by pretty quickly, I mean 3 to 4 months, if they're really going to be able to make a deal for you. If your technology story is great, if it's being received well, and yeah, received received well by the investor community, um, and it's just a matter of timing before something clicks, but they have something to go off of.
mm,
If if they're if they know that you're, I mean, I'm just going to speak crudely. If they know that your story's shit and you're paying a $5,000 or $10,000 a month retainer, I mean, what's their incentive for telling you that your story is shit after month 5 or 6 or 7 when they know that they're not going to raise the capital for you? Meanwhile, they're just draining your bank, right? So
Mm.
that's the economic story on that. The actual silver bullet story on that for early stage companies is hiring somebody to raise capital for a seed or Series A is a huge red flag. First and foremost, you have to think about it, meaning from investors. First and foremost, it sends multiple flags. Series A investors are typically early, or they are early stage investors. So what you're saying to them is, if I have to write a $2 million check into this company because that investment banker or consultant solicited me to invest in your company, and I really do want to invest in your company, but my whole goal is I need to make money off of that 2 million that I give you to return back to my limited partners. But day one, the moment that I give you that 2 million, 20%, 5%, 3%, 10% of that goes right to the agent. So I'm actually giving you less money to put to work to then hopefully return my money so I can return on investment to my limited partners, right? So
Mm.
investors don't want to pay early stage bankers their fee. It's just like, it's almost like a
Mm.
catch 22, or not catch 22. It's almost like a stinky fish. It's like, I don't really want to do that. It doesn't make sense, to be honest with you. I'm giving you money and then it's not all going to go to work. I got to go pay somebody's fee. I don't really like that feeling. The other thing is, all that it really signals is that the CEO is incorrect. It's not a good CEO. Early stage CEOs have to be able to die on the vine of grinding it through, selling the story, traveling the world, building teams, eating all the shit that they can to be able to build this company. Seriously. And you're telling me that you don't have the time, or you don't have the capability, or you don't have the grit to go out and sell your story, your pitch deck, and go out and find investors who are willing to invest in that early stage. They're investing in you. They're investing in your story and your capability and capacity to then build this company. Because keep in mind, at Series A, the technology that they're investing in today is going to change 15 times before it's a commercial device, right? They have a long way to go.
Mm.
R&D, clinical trials, iterations, verification, validation, right? Manufacturing challenges, whatever it may be. So those early stage investors are investing in that executive team with the hope of telling a good story that will iterate enough to be a successful product. So all that you're doing is like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go out and raise the money. I'm going to go hire that person to see if they can go raise the money. Well, if you can't go raise the money and you're the CEO, what else can't you do? And are you really the right CEO for this company? That's really what that signals when you hire an external firm early on. And that's common knowledge
Mm.
amongst a lot of investors when you ask them that. It's like, what do you think about Series A companies who hire investment bankers or consultants to go raise money for them? Well, they're likely not the right CEO because they don't have the grit, and they're willing to spend money on a chance and a prayer for someone who might not be successful. Not great.
Mm.
On the flip side, with regards to the executive board member that you were mentioning, yeah, they're limited to their own network, but it doesn't mean that they can't build their network. And also, they're there as mentors and support for the CEO. And then in conjunction, usually as a pair, like I've been a part of plenty of investor pitches on the boards that I sit of with the CEOs that I'm there. Or I've heard of a lot of investor pitches where the CEO and the board members are doing it together, because it adds gravitas to how they play off each other. You have the proverbial gray-haired executive and board member who's going to be there to answer some of the tough, bigger picture questions that maybe the youthful executive and CEO may not be experienced with. But then the youthful CEO is living this day in and day out and can answer all the tactical questions on the technology and what they plan on doing day to day. So it's a nice pairing. And if they need to go out and find more investors, then they go out and find more investors. And does that mean, as opposed to taking a holiday over the weekend, it means that someone's sitting in front of Google looking up more investors or family offices or VCs or angel groups that they can pitch to? The answer is yes.
Do you take position on some companies as external advisor? How do you, because you mentioned that there is companies that approach you to for your services. Do you advise them as well on and do you participate in those companies?
Participate in how? Investing?
Investing and advising as an external advisor, board members.
All of
Um,
the above. So we have an advisory practice that is very complementary to our talent acquisition practice. So we can do the transactional, consultative, tell me what you're looking for, or glad to do an organizational development consultation of like, I can help you out with what you need for your team. And then once we know, let's
mm,
go out and find that. That's what we do day in and day out. That's our talent acquisition practice. There's a lot of advisory that we do. We actually have an advisory practice that's very sophisticated, with led by a couple of very experienced people who are executives in the medical device industry, who have gone through acquisitions, gone through exits, made several big time investments, and they have a much more sophisticated way of going about the advisory approach. So we definitely do advisory. It's complementary to talent acquisition. um, Personally, yes, of course, we've invested into, at this point, 7 companies and 3 funds. So we're limited partners into 3 funds, so we know how they work. We've invested into 7 startup companies. We've seen their trajectory, where they've hit milestones, where they've hit concrete walls, the challenges that they face earlier on going into the next rounds of financing. And then also, yes, I sit on boards. I sit on private boards as well as public boards.
Thank you. I think like just maybe like a last comment, because we're approaching like the end of the interview. But last comment, I'm really curious to get your feedback on as an investor, as an advisor, how do you evaluate like the opportunity on a medical device? And I think like as a recommendation for funders, what do they need to make sure to pitch, make sure to share with the investors to share their story and share the opportunity that they build?
Two-part answer to a two-part question. So if it's to institutional investors, venture capitalists, and then outside of that, and of course there's going to
Yes.
be great overlap, but the stories that you're pitching to high net worth individuals and family offices and angel groups, generally speaking, is a different story that you're pitching to institutional venture capital. I'm going to be incredibly rude right now, incredibly crude and rude. Institutional VCs have one purpose. They might have a thesis of investing in game-changing and health-changing medical devices, but make no mistake, institutional venture capital is an investment vehicle. Their sole purpose and their sole existence is to make money off of money, make more money than they have in the fund. That's solely what they do. That's why VCs invest in space and food and commercial real estate and direct-to-consumer retail goods and medical devices and biopharma. Make no mistake, there is no impact. There is no let me feel good about this. They might
Mm,
be physicians who have become venture capitalists, or they might be operators who have become venture capitalists, and they are going after medical devices. But in order for an institutional venture capital firm to sign off on making an investment into a company, they must be of belief, after a shit ton of due diligence, that every dollar they invest, they're hoping to get minimally that dollar back and not lose any money, and one, two, three, four, $10 for every dollar that they do give.
mm,
That's what they're hoping for. It just happens to be a
mm,
medical device. So when you're
mm,
pitching to venture capitalists, they don't give a shit if it's your mother who inspired you to start this technology because she fell victim to dementia, or she died of a heart attack, or your brother got hit by a car and had to go through traumatic orthopedic surgery, and you created the next best trauma technology for trauma orthopedic surgeons, right? They don't care about that. I mean, it sounds nice. Maybe that's, they'll be more entertained in the meeting, but they have to understand why giving you a dollar is more effective in terms of financial return on investment then putting it into cryptocurrency, putting it into Wall Street's stock market or the stock market, publicly traded markets, putting it into real estate, putting it into anything else but your company. So once you understand that very, very basic premise that institutional venture capitalists aren't a bunch of nice people just because they're investing in medical device. No, they don't make impact investments. This is not for fun. This is for money. And so when you put together your storyline, you have to tell them how they are going to make money. Yes, you have to tell them which physicians are involved and all the politics that go involved in that in the big market. But the big market has to exist because once this thing goes commercial, they have to sell a lot. Or it has to still be a big market because they have to believe that Medtronic or Boston Scientific or Edwards Life Science or J&J is going to buy that technology because they're going to utilize the big market. That's the only reason.
Mm.
Okay, now that passion project and story is done. The other pitch is you can talk about how your mother fell victim to dementia. And that's what inspired you to go out and dedicate your life. Or like, for example, developing a total artificial heart when your father had died from heart failure and you want to dedicate the next 20 years of your life of building a heart that is completely artificial and it's eradicating the need for people who are dying while they're waiting for heart transplants. And you can take that story and make it super passionate and super emotional and let them know how you're going to game change the world of heart failure and you're going to move forward science in heart failure and the cardiac medicines. And you can sell that story to high net worth individuals or family offices or angel groups or impact investors who are not beholden to an institutional venture capital 10-year horizon that they have to return the money. When you go to a high, like the companies that I've invested in, I invested in those companies for various different reasons. I'm not looking for a return on investment. The moment that I wrote that check, I expected I'd never see that money again. But I made friends along the way. I learned and made friends with other high net worth individuals. I've met other family offices because of the investments I've made. I've learned what it means and the challenges it takes to go through very early stage iterative design and development of a medical device and the challenges that they face of finding the right vendors, et cetera. And just in general, like what happens in the first 3 years of a medical device company that all of this building from white sheet of paper takes when you're taking on early seed stage money. I paid for that experience. That's the way I look at it. And I also rapidly built a huge network of angel groups, angel networks, family offices, how they think about making investments, et cetera. So that's when you can sell that passion story. If someone's coming to me and telling me that their mother died of dementia and they are revolutionizing the industry of dementia by creating this device that's going to blah, blah, blah. And my mother starts, she forgets what turkey is at Thanksgiving. And I'm like, holy shit, mom, do you have dementia? And then all of a sudden someone pitches me on their dementia technology. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if you're going to work or not, but I love the mission that you're on. I love what you're doing. I want to be a part of that ride. You see the difference? And that's the difference between not having a return or an expected return on investment versus a return on investment that's mandatory to make the investment. And those are the two stories that you have to balance.
And I think as well, like those two type of person, those arrive, I would say, like you're going to go to talk with an angel group like before obviously like going to talk with a traditional VC because and you're going to pitch with the idea because at the end of the day you are not ready on the technology point of view to basically have any proof that the technology is ready, anything, and that's like the only option that's are offering to you at that point in stage, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Any last feedback, last comment that you wanted to share with us? I really appreciate that you joined the podcast and really appreciate like everything you shared today.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I mean, last words are, if you're going to be involved in medical devices, you have to be passionate about why you're here in this industry. There is a plethora of industries that you can make a lot more money in, but at the same time, we get the benefit of the doubt of saying, if everything works out, we help out a bunch of people. And if it all doesn't work out, we tried helping out a bunch of people. And there's always an extra benefit of feeling good about doing something for the good, versus just that immediate gratification and financial return that doesn't necessarily feel like you're helping out humanity. So, you have to be a medical device for the right reasons. And then being an entrepreneur in medical device, just realize what you're getting involved in. I mean, it is going to test you, twist you, turn you upside down, make a lot of enemies, make even more friends, give you the best learning experience of your life of what it means to do something good for the world, but how hard and how many obstacles actually
Mm.
exist for you to actually do something good for the world. I think that's a huge mind opener of an idea where it's like you really do want to do something great for the world, but you really understand within a decent amount of time that the world is pretty rigged to make it challenging for
Mm.
you to do that. And economics come into factors and motivations come into factors. And so, if you can likely not know what you're signing up for and then still just cruise and do it anyway, knowing that you're doing something for the good, stay in our industry, join and do something good for medical device. Um, Not for the faint of heart. And I don't mean that just because I'm saying that on a podcast. It's seriously true. It's fun doing these podcasts. It's fun having media. It's fun being able to share stories. But there's a lot of lonely, long nights, airports, failures, crying moments, people who you realize aren't friends but much foes instead. And I don't want to paint a negative story. There's a lot of positive that come into it, but if you don't have thick skin, stay out of the game.
Thank you. What an amazing recommendation. Thank you so much, Giovanni. I really appreciate again that you joined. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for having me.